Hey everybody, welcome. We're going to get started. Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Parker Menzimer, and I am the Public Programs Manager at the Poetry Society of America. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that books by these authors are available from Greenlight Bookstore over to the right, so you can purchase books there after the reading during the signing. I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of our speakers today. They're going to share work with you, about 8 to 10 minute readings, and then we're going to jump in with the conversation. So I'm just going to jump right in. Our first reader this afternoon is going to be Richie Hofmann. Richie Hofmann is the author of 2 books of poems, 100 Lovers from Knopf and Second Empire from Alice James Books. His poetry has recently appeared in the Paris Review, the New Yorker, Poetry Magazine, the Yale Review, and has been honored with a Ruth Lilly and Wallace Stegner Fellowship. Cyrée Jarelle Johnson is a poet from Piscataway, New Jersey. Round of applause for Cyrée, thank you. He is the author of Slingshot, a winner of the Lambda Literary Award for Gay Poetry. Johnson was awarded a Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Poetry Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation and served as the inaugural poet in residence at the Brooklyn Public Library. Watch Night, his forthcoming book of poetry, considers ancestry as history in the context of the Great Black Migration of the 20th century, familial estrangement, and queer family. He is a 2023 National Endowment of the Arts Creative Writing Fellow. Maggie Millner is the author of Couplets. Her poems have appeared in The New Yorker, The Paris Review, The Nation, Bomb Magazine, The Kenyon Review, Poetry Magazine, and elsewhere. She is currently a senior editor at the Yale Review and a lecturer in writing at Yale. José Olivarez is the son of Mexican immigrants. His debut book of poems, Citizen Illegal, was a finalist for the Penn Gene Stein Award and a winner of the 2018 Chicago Review Books Poetry Prize. It was named a top book of 2018 by Adroit Journal, NPR, and the New York Public Library. Along with Felicia Chavez and Willie Perdomo, he co-edited the poetry anthology, The Breakbeat Poets, Volume 4, Latin Next. He co-hosts the podcast, The Poetry Gods. His most recent work is Promises of Gold, which you'll be hearing from today. Please give a hand to our panelists. All right, Richie, would you start us off?
Okay, and now I'm going to read poems. Can you hear me okay? Oh, good. I'm going to read some poems of, what is this called? Love, sex, and desire. My favorite subjects from my book, 100 Lovers. One Another. We are knotted in the white bedding. I don't want sleep to separate us. We breathe with the darkness like an enormous animal. Our bodies manufacture their odors. I taste earth on his skin. Eros enters where shame had lived. Pale sun, then morning. How easily the earth closes its cavities. I leave the apartment wearing his black anorak. Even though this book is called 100 Lovers, it's, I think, really a book about marriage. This is called Spring Wedding. The day before we married, we napped in the afternoon with no sheets over us and felt the breeze from the lake on our backs and butts and legs. It felt different, a small rebellion, though we've slept in one another's arms for 10 years. Like little beasts, vulnerable and hairy, with saliva on our skin. The next day, we were men again, ironed shirts, knotted ties of silk, deodorant, parted hair, promises. We will have children. We will buy another house. One of us will get cancer. All of our parents will die. Thank you. My God. One of my friends wanted me to read that at her wedding, but she thought her parents would be too freaked out. This next poem is crude, but educational. It's called The Fables. In school, we read a ridiculous story by Aesop. One not involving wise or foolish animals or insects, but one in which a god allocates emotions to the parts of the body, intellect to the mind, love to the heart, etc., etc., until only the asshole is left, to which the god assigns shame. Understandably, shame is unhappy with the accommodations, but it's too late. Shame curses. If Eros should ever seek to occupy that place, I will leave the body for good. This is why homosexuals have no shame, according to Aesop or one of his Victorian translators. According to me, this is why there is no moral order to my sexual imagination, and why praising my looks and hair and white flesh as I lie with you, then falling silent for days at a time, you really are the master of my pain. Things that are rare. It is so easy to imagine your absence. Maybe it is night. We are still handsome. All the young are. It is so easy. Another thing to be beautiful. How gently the curtain falls back down and the room is dark again. The season of in-betweenities. My eyes heavy, my lips numb. Fingerprints on the unjacketed books. Inside the collars of the shirts in the open closet. An affluent night. You've touched everything in my small room. I'm going to end with another love poem. This is called French Novel. You were my second lover. You had dark eyes and hair like a painting of a man. We lay on our stomachs, reading books in your bed. I emailed my professor. I will be absent from French Novel due to sickness. You put on some piano music. Even though it was winter, we had to keep the window open day and night. The room was so hot, the air so dry, it made our noses bleed. With boots, we trekked through slush for a bottle of red wine we weren't allowed to buy, our shirts unbuttoned under our winter coats. The French language distinguishes between the second of two and the second of many. Of course, we'd have other lovers. Snow fell in our hair. You were my second lover. Another way of saying this, you were the other, not another. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Richie. Now Cyrée will be reading from Slingshot.
Hey, I'm Cyrée Jarelle Johnson. And this is a poem that is lewd. All of my poems are very lewd. So if you didn't come for that, then sorry for you. But it's also an ode to my friend and sometimes mentor, Leah Lakshmi Piepsna Samar Sinha. Magenta, the kind my homie Leah calls screaming vulva, a sparkler through gray hair with glint of mercury. Quickly become elders in this city, smears our fingers like new murder. They're my mentor with Sinti Roma's bleeding tarot. When I was a kid, they wrote Femshark Manifesto. I lived a life with pink books and gem mischief. That zine was the zine that I mean when I mean the zine. It was a roll call for femme styles, pumped a saline shot of sadness, but at least there was fucking to look forward to. I wanted to grow up, then be them, then be their friend forever. Wash all their dishes, eat drying pizza out the box, so I filled 3 bags and moved to Oakland. It was blank verse for 10 months and fucking. I slept on Anna's couch as ever and wrote for weed magazines. Hot-handed roof gardens blush pink as lips. The other ocean coughed out boys with limps and lisps. Prince punctuated all my trysts. I dated a cop for about 6 months, a future flush with killer's gear. He won't tell you about the rapes, but he paints and sculpts them in his face where eyebrows once were and should appear. Alas, this poem can't reinstall the skin or grow his eyebrows back again. His fetid hide has ceased to be for all of our eternities, and for this, only impotence. A poem mauve with fizzy goiter, flaccid as Pacific Six spray spewed. A poem to coil you in fistula of yarn and stars. So that poem is actually about how I came to consciousness. So I'm from a family where a lot of people are in the military because I'm from a town with an active military base. And I had never thought of soldiers as cops until I met a soldier who really defended cops. And I was like, holy shit, you're a fucking cop. So it made me see my entire childhood, my life in a different way just by fucking on somebody. So while I think that sometimes poems about lust and sex can be reduced to pleasure, the basest kind, I don't know that we can really know each other until we know each other in the eyes of a lover. Speaking of that, you know how sometimes you're like messing around with someone, especially if you're like a trans guy who dates other trans guys or whatever, or like an approximation therein, and you're like, you kind of look like me. Why do you look so much like me? Yeah, it happens. It's called doppelganger. Queer utopians think human beings are perfectible, but they're not. They're just correctable. In an hourly motel, I ask you how many tattoos you have, although I count 14 every time you doze and add your spit to the mysterious stains on the pillows, but the ink proliferates in twilight sticky gold. Is a cover-up 1 or 2 or 3 tattoos? And how many about your forced disappearances? And how many about the appearance of manhood? And how many about being a man with his face buried in pillows? A short black man hydroplaning down our impossible. I hate how much I love when you suck my toes, and I despise you for making me beg. That's why I can't know you. That's why I stay perpetually ahead of your judgment. You look just like me when I'm fucking you from behind. I'll suck that shrimp cock to the glove pop plus 1 extra watt before I figure it out. I don't know God anymore, but let's stay here on our knees and wait for him to come. So I was lucky enough, after Slingshot came out, I got reviewed in the New York Times, and I was like, oh, well, what are they going to say about the book? And they kept the foot stuff in, and I was like, they kept the foot stuff in. Okay, that's kind of cool. Toe sucking in the Times. Anyways, this last poem is about the devil's polycule, and if you were raised Christian, You probably didn't know that when Satan fell, he took all his boyfriends with him, and their names were Belial and Morningstar and Andromalius and Barakajal and Penamule and Ronob and Zegon, and that is also what this poem is called. Everybody knows I know a secret. I've stared at windows until hands poked through, and I have nursed men left on my doorstep with stern, unshorn nipples like fraying tissue. We learned we could never go home, at least not without making pistols of ourselves. I was made to jaw on your fennel stalk. We were made and raised to raise the fallen and lift them high by their turgid taproots. Everyone's heard I saw 2 king snakes fuck. Everybody knows I know who gets more pleasure. The pleasure arrives for the taker who takes cacophonously, superfluously. The yes, please, fuck. The no, go home, finish. Yes, please, fuck, finish, so run home on the white bus clouded by need. Your mama wonders who's been over, says it was a black, she can smell it, must have been that blue magic smeared over your pillowcase. My head shape dented and scented and haunting your fingertips. Anyone but a black, she thinks. Someone pretty and black, my mother hopes. In this scene, no one gets what they have wanted. In this scene, you ask Jeeves penis envy. In this scene, you fly me to Arizona, 4 stained fingers, twist, twist inside, push, push. In every mirror you find a demon, 4 stained fingers, twist, twist inside, push, push. In this house, there is no God but downlink. In this apartment, we take rent in rimming. In this hovel, you flash your dick on path trains. In this shack, I suck you deep on the pier. In this delusion, you kiss me in public. In this delusion, I meet your parents. In this delusion, we have soft babies. In this delusion, you keep a steady job. You are hard work. You are brute labor. You are the original sin in house paint and the tripod upon which the Pythia sat, and words repel you, and my tongue does not, and we become sentient and escape and string back into the Gordian knot. You ox cart king. You spiked silver seller turned gold stroker in the fire and tar woods behind my house, framed in white flame. Antlers draped in tiny lights we learned were beetles. You did it. I let you, and you did it. Blood magic and Hennessy, I'm sorry. I promise you I paid and paid and paid with 8 years of no good dick, with violence. Blood magic and Hennessy, I'm sorry. You must know I loved you in loops. First I'd puke on you, then watch you fold drawers. Little squares of black and red hook houses. Daddy, I look for you in other faces changed by years of no good dick and violence. In this scene, I Google penis envy, my stern, unshorn nipples like fraying tissue. Daddy, I look for you in other faces, 4 stained fingers, twist, twist inside, push, push. You must know that I loved you in loops. Blood magic and Hennessy, I'm sorry. In this hovel, you flash your dick on path trains changed by years of no goodness and violence. In this delusion, I meet your parents, have soft babies, you keep a steady job. Behind our house, framed in white flame, antlers draped with tiny lights we learned were beetles. Everyone's heard I saw 2 king snakes fuck. Everybody knows I know a secret. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, Maggie Millner is going to read from Couplets.
Hi. Oh my gosh, I'm really happy to be reading with 3 poets I admire so much. Thank you for gathering us. This is awesome. I'm going to read 3 poems. I'll pause between them. They're not individually titled. They're part of one kind of long, overarching narrative. 3 of them. I'll jump in. You hadn't intended to see her a second time, but when she invited you out for a drink one Friday night, you decided to go and find out if perhaps your desire had waned, had taken care of itself, as strong feelings born of fantasy and instinct sometimes do when brought into the harsh light of lived causality. But it was the same thing all over again. Immediately on seeing her, you felt flushed and exposed as if you'd been caught crying. Your stomach considered for a moment revising the course of its metabolism. You sat at right angles on a banquette in the corner of the room, brushing knees, then hips, then shoulders. At last call, you were the only people there. Then she asked you to share a cab with her. You did. She asked you to walk her in. You did. She asked you to come upstairs. You did. To get into her bed. You did. To press yourself lengthwise against her. You did. To fall asleep like that. You did. To drink coffee with her when you woke. You did. To kiss her on the mouth. You did. To kiss her with your tongue. You did. To let her touch you once just to see if you were really as wet as you said you were. You did. To unclasp your bra. You did. To rub yourself against her till you came. You did. To read her the erotic poem you loved. You did. To remove your pants. You did. To let her taste you. You did. To come again inside her mouth. You did. To penetrate her gingerly. You did. To get out of bed at last. You did. To go get pizza down the street. You did. To eat it on the sidewalk in the snow. You did. To go back home with her. You did. To sleep there one more night. You did. To stay until the sun came up. You did. Now and then I'd get the strange impression that she was me. A stab of thonic recognition would set off a little spasm in my eye. Sometimes from far away I'd spy her slanted walk or messy hair, and every muscle in my body would contract. At school, while my students bent over their exams, I'd scroll through photos on her Instagram, the fabric growing damp between my legs where her finger liked to press itself inside me like a key. An undiscovered ancestor, an eidolon, an isomer, and an uncanny sense of unity to love in her what had always seemed deformity in me. To yield, to feel the snugness of the fit, to turn the lock, to hear the little click. Other times I could feel myself become him. Those tics I'd found most tiresome, his artificial cheer, his trick of going silent in the heat of conflict, or accusing me of being self-indulgent without ever specifying what he meant, suddenly belonged to me, my temper having lifted in our time together some properties of his. His ideas crowded my head as if through an earpiece. His hand's phantom weight guided my own. His scowl in my mirror, and in my microphone his speech, down to the voice's note of spite, the patronizing diagnosis, the words I'd use to scold her when she told a tasteless joke. It was the same old dialectic I had tried to leave behind. This is partly why I thought I'd lost my mind. But when she'd start to plunge into depression, as I've often done, curled in bed or prostrate on the ground, listing all the people she'd let down, it was by remembering how he'd soothed me that I soothed her. And when I held her cheek against my cheek, I was drawing from the well of love he filled. So I became, after all, not him exactly, but a kind of conduit between them, a conversation they conducted with my mouth. And when I was not unbelievably sad, I was moved unbelievably to hold inside me both my lovers and to introduce them to each other, there, in the hollow, just above the heart, among the little folds where the voice starts.
Thank you, Maggie. And now Jose will be reading from Promises of Gold.
Hello, everybody. My name is José Guadalupe Olivarez. I'm going to start with the last poem of my first book, Citizen Illegal, and then I'll read 2 poems from Promises of Gold. I just want to say hello to all of you. You look amazing. Thank you for being here with us. I'm so excited to be here with Cyrée, Richie, and Maggie. This poem is called Guapo. I start with my feet because I hardly ever look at them to say hello. Hello, left foot. Hello, right foot. I give my feet my favorite name, the name my mom gives me when she brags to relatives. Que guapos, I say to my best kick, my awkward dance partners, my friends in almost catching the beat. I move up through the hairy terrain named my legs. Guapo, I say to moonlight skin. Heartbreaker, I say to my thighs, ass, and dick. My lover took all her pet names when she left. My name doesn't belong to her now. Ay papi, I say to the scar on my belly. I only knew my name when it came out of her mouth. Hey shorty, what it is, I say to my freckled chest. To the red bumps I used to hide under t-shirts. Ugly as all hell, but all mine. My chest so pale it glows in the dark. Guapo, I say to the lanterns I carry. My red beard. I give myself all of the names I like. Young Joselito, Papi Churro, Lupe. Shout out my hair while I still have it. This is an old poem. Shout out my hairline and how it makes me look like my dad. My face I got from my mom. We look the same when we are laughing. Guapo, I say. It is my new name. It is my old name. It is my only name. All right, this poem is called Nate Calls Me Soft. It was inspired by my friend Nate calling me soft. Creative titles, you feel me? Nate calls me soft. If we were better at being honest, maybe it wouldn't take a bottle of something strong to make us talk straight. Straight edge as we used to be, driving around in that old Toyota Tercel from open mic to open mic. If I confess that the memory alone makes the corner of my eye itch, would you call me soft? Nate says yes. B says duh. Adam says you were the softest. My therapist says, let's talk about your parents. My brothers say, if all you're gonna do is talk, then pass the blunt. Mexican Jesus says nothing. Mercury is in reggaeton. Do the stars only talk to women? Tonight the stars are hidden by the brash lights of the city, and I want to say my friends can see my softness through all the jokes I crack, but maybe I don't need the stars to be tender. Maybe the next time I see you, I'll slap away the dap, pull you in close, and tell you under the ordinary streetlights how much I love you and that you still ain't shit. Cool. This will be the last poem I read. This poem is the second to last poem in the book. It's called Let's Get Married. I wrote it for my friends Allison and Nate on the occasion of their wedding, and which happened 2 weeks before my own wedding. So let's get married. Let's get married on a Tuesday with the 6-piece from Harold's as our witness. Yeah, shout out to you if you know. Let's get married at noon and then again at 3:30 when the school day lets out and a whole block of dandelions flower our ceremony. Let's get married under a full moon and then again under a new moon so every celestial being can witness our vows. Love, one wedding isn't enough for me. I want to propose again and again. On a Wednesday because you did the dishes. On a Thursday because we woke up next to each other again. Say yes, say less. I'll be on one knee asking to share in the delight of knowing each other. Let's get married because Chicago, because St. Louis is a city on the map, because your name is my favorite word. Let's get married because there are vows we can only make in the dark, because we don't need a witness to say I do. Let's get married because it's raining and that's supposed to be good luck. Mi amor, mi cielo, mi vida. Let's get married in every language we can and can't speak. Under every God, my God, the way you look at me is a miracle I believe in, because we get one life. One, say yes, then say yes again. Let's get married after we get married, because underneath every word I write, there is one word I carve into every desk. One word I tag onto every building on every block of my heart. Marry me, make me, no, not complete, but a little more alive than I've ever been. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Jose. Can we get a round of applause for all of our readers? Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Parker.
So I want to open the conversation up with a question for you, Jose. You wrote very movingly in your foreword to Promises of Gold about the kind of love poetry that you wanted to attempt to write in the book. And you talk about wanting to write love poems for your family, wanting to write love poems for your homies, not necessarily writing erotic love poems, but sort of like broadening the idea of love to be more inclusive. And I'm wondering if you could speak a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spend a lot of time traveling to high schools around the country and universities. And before reading a love poem from Citizen Illegal, I'd be like, all right, raise your hand if you're in love. And all the students would be silent. You know what I mean? And it just occurred to me that for a lot of the young people that I was seeing, they had, and I think this was true for me too, their idea, and maybe, I'll speak about my own idea, my idea of what love had been so hyper-focused on the romantic that I was missing all of the ways that love was already abundant in my life. And so I wanted to take the time to really think about all those different loves that were present in my life in this book.
Thank you. And then sort of a similar question for you, Richie. You said, and it was an offhand comment, but that although your book is called 100 Lovers, you think of it as a book about marriage. I'm wondering if you could expand on that comment.
Well, I think in this book I wanted to capture what was kind of uniquely beautiful about different kinds of erotic love. I kind of kept to the erotic realm, but for me that's kind of a wound that keeps giving, so I haven't felt like I've exhausted it. But I think it was also about becoming a self. I mean, I was thinking, like, as I was listening to everyone up here read their poems, it was interesting how many of the love poems were really about learning who a self is, who desires, seeing oneself in a lover's eyes. And so I think that's kind of the kind of premise of so much of the book. And marriage is, the kind of that one lover that one commits to irrationally, but beautifully, seemed like an important subject, especially what it meant for me to be able to be married as a gay man, and thinking about how all of these other kinds of erotic loves don't go away, even if one is married. Those desires are still an important part of relating to the world and relating to yourself.
Yeah, I love what you say about sort of love poetry or erotic poetry being a kind of revelation of the self or a discovery of the self. And, I wondered a lot about self-revelation as a feature of love poetry and often of erotic poetry as I was rereading all of your books. And, I was struck by one of the ways we often know that we're reading a love poem is we have this feeling that the poet and the speaker are sort of the same person and that they're speaking from experience about an experience of love. So I was wondering how you all approached self-revelation, confession, the experience of writing about yourself in these books, if you felt like you were writing about your experience, if you felt like you were trying to trouble the idea of the love poem as sort of a confessional, self-revelatory act. Maybe we could start with Cyrée. Would you start?
Yeah, I am a 12th house Venus. I don't really think of myself as Troubling the Love poem. I love love. And it's in Pisces too, Sun and Venus in Pisces. So I really love love. I think that it's a very important topic. And I also think that it's overdetermined in our society. Like, who can be loved, who believes themselves to be lovable, who believes that they can find love in this lifetime, who believes they can keep it, who sees models of their own lovability, even within marginalized communities, right? There's such an emphasis in queer communities on conventional beauty that's decided for us by other people. Other people could decide what's beautiful for even queers. And so, and internalize it, about how much love we think we can have and with whom. And I think that when I came out as trans, an entire world of sex opened for me that maybe wasn't available to me in other bodies, but an entire world of love closed for me. And Slingshot is, in some ways, it's an elegy in love poems and a goodbye to a time in my life where, living as a femme woman, people treated me like a trophy, like an item, and living as a femme something else, people treat me like a freak. So really thinking about what love was available to me in those bodies, the ways that I felt about the people that I loved in all of my forms, I think it's important work, and I think it's political work. And some of the work in Slingshot too, because it is, so much of the subject matter is definitely confessional, but in other ways, right? Like talking about histories of sexual violence, state violence. And so thinking about not just wanting to come off as a victim, but really thinking of the ways that love implicates us, in the ways that love exposes our bias and doesn't render us in good lights. So I don't think that there's a more important topic. And in that way, I align myself with Plato and Socrates and, other folks who thought love was really important.
Thank you. Maggie, could you speak to this a bit in Couplets? How does that sort of confessional or self-revelatory?
Yeah. I think a lot about that category of the confessional. Part of what we imagine, I think, when we imagine a confessional poem is a poem that's ostensibly revealing something true, something more authentic, right, than was previously sayable in poetry, right? That the confessional was the advent of, poetry about psychological distress and interior experience, and suddenly people were disclosing sort of maybe unsavory or slightly sort of inappropriate kinds of material in poetry that hadn't, that the form hadn't been meant to accommodate in some way. And we think of it, I think as a result of that, we think of it as being true, being this is you're getting some kind of unmediated or unfiltered version of a self. I think it's what we do is incredibly mediated and incredibly filtered, right? Obviously in this book that's foregrounded using form, right? Using a highly mediated form that doesn't really resemble conversational speech or prose writing, right? It rhymes. But also, but I'm very aware of kind of both, wanting to do two things at once, wanting to give a reader an experience that feels like they're being let in on some very intimate truth, and that that the poem is a room that we can kind of be in together, the two of us in this deeply kind of intimate address, and I want that to be kind of authentic. I want it to be honest. I don't want to be dissembling, but I also want the reader to know at the same time that I'm I'm in charge, and I'm making something that is, it's artificial. It's artifice. It's a kind of production, right? The question is, are you revealing something? Are you creating something, right? I would say those things are sort of, I want the reader to have a sort of slightly exaggerated experience of being disclosed to, but I don't want them ever to think that they're, that they're getting all of me in some sense either. And I think that's where form and that's where kind of poetic or lyrical language kind of comes in. And we think of love poetry, I think, like in the sort of maybe pre-confessional love poetry is often about, these are poems of seduction. They're poems that are kind of, if you think of a lot of like pre-romantic, like British or English poetry, it's like the purpose of the love poem is to seduce, which is that has a lot of like power relations baked into it, right? That's very much not about the self. It's about the way that poetry is supposed to act on the reader, the one true intended reader who is the beloved.
The recipient, the address.
Yeah,
We have like Elizabeth Barrett Browning, How Do I Love Thee?
Yes,
Let me count the ways.
Shakespeare. I mean,
Shakespeare
all
sonnets.
of this. So thinking about the way confessionalism kind of weirds that or queers that or changes that kind of address, I think is something that I'm always thinking about.
So you mentioned Shakespeare, famously has a long cycle of sonnets, and the sonnets have sort of different speakers. But Richie, I wanted to ask you have sort of sonnets in your book. You have sort of sonnets. You have these 14-line
that's
poems.
what they're called, sort of sonnets.
I'm wondering if you can talk about how you came to that form, how you thought about that form, how you were using it, the lineage of it, if that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was very interested in the lineage of the sonnet as kind of a quintessential instrument of love and erotic poetry. And I think it was important for me to remind myself, like, it's so easy to think about a figure like Shakespeare and just, and think that that we know something about those poems, but I mean, they're not staid at all. We think of them as staid, but they're not staid. They're extremely weird. They're extremely queer. They don't make sense. They have multiple and unknown recipients. I mean, they function in a very strange kind of way. So I wanted to remind myself of that as I was working on these. But I just think from a compositional standpoint, the sonnet just offers a kind of perfect shape to unfurl thought inside. For me, who's undisciplined, a little out of control, it's helpful to know when a poem is going to be ending. You know that at a certain point something has to happen. That's helpful for getting the poems written and teaching me something about poetry. To have the kind of confinement of the form is really useful.
Yeah, I'd love to answer that question
Please.
as someone who also works
Please.
in the sonnet as a form. The last poem that I read is actually a cycle of 5 sonnets. And I think that one of the things that a sonnet provides that other forms don't provide, even inherited in traditional forms, is that iambic pentameter is the length of a natural breath. And so it is conversational. It is inherently confessional, the sonnet, right? And so by constructing the sonnet, especially in 2023, you are interrogating the sonnet, right? Like, you cannot address form in English without addressing the history of colonialism, of European literature being the standard by which everyone is measured, right? It's a limiting factor as much as it is an enabling factor. And I think that that's one of the reasons that, if there's anything I proselytize, I do proselytize marginalized writers making form their own, because there's a way that you can address the canon without having to say some of the things that power expects you to say about your experience, just by writing in the blocks that, using their Lego set to tell your own story. And so thinking about the sonnet, not just as a romanticized form, but also as a hegemonic form, and thinking about what the pressures of oppression are on the way that we love each other.
Thank you. So, Jose, I'd love to ask you about form in the context of Promises of Gold. I was struck by how multifarious the forms are. There's so many, like, it's ecstatic, There's prose poetry, there are short poems, there are longer lyrics. I'm wondering how you thought about form and approached that as you composed the book.
For me, when I was kind of putting together the book, I was thinking about the experience of the reader and wanting to provide different. I mean, for me, there's kind of three major themes to Promises of Gold. There's love in all its different manifestations. There's money and class. And then I think there's place. I think, where I come from is very important and where my poetry is rooted in. And so in trying to tell this story, these poems about how these three things kind of intertwine, I wanted to provide different entry points and different styles and different ways of kind of not necessarily repeating the same thing, but trying to break through some of those containers, if that makes sense. So there are a bunch of sonnets in Promises of Gold. For me, one of the most important reasons is because since the beginning of the pandemic, it's been harder for me to write longer things. My like discipline, which was already kind of a question mark to begin with, is even more questionable now, And so a sonnet has been kind of perfect for me because that is kind of the 14 lines is like what I can think in, you know what I mean? And it fits with the kind of ways I want to write with the volta, and I'm always kind of looking for where I can kind of flip it a little bit. So that was very helpful to me in kind of finding the entryways into the poems.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask a question and just ask you all to answer it, like coming back towards me, like a slingshot. So if I could ask, what love... This is sort of you can answer this two ways. I'm thinking of what love poets sort of inspired you, and I think the answer to this question could be like, what is a love poet that you encountered at a formative time that sort of like turned you on to love poetry, or like which poets were you thinking about as you composed these books?
Cool. I was born on Valentine's Day, so I, like Cyrée, kind of was born into love poems. The first two poems I ever wrote in my life, one was a love poem, and one was like a political poem about bringing our troops back from Iraq. So, like very early on, the two kind of dominant things in my life have been pretty consistent. For me, the poets that made me, and I'll specify a single poem. My favorite love poem is Mountain Dew Commercial disguised as a love poem by the poet Matthew Oltzman. I love how surprising it is, how it turns this ordinary object of a Mountain Dew drink and turns it into something that is very romantic and seductive. And so for me, that's the poem that made me feel like, all right, just because I'm from like a steel-working town of Calumet City, I can make it as romantic as Paris. Like, let me see if I can find to make our little basements where we used to hang out and party and do whatever, and see if I can make that as romantic, as seductive as somewhere like the Eiffel Tower or like the postcard images. And so for me, that poem meant everything to me.
Thank you.
I think of Adrienne Rich's 21 love poems. That feels like a kind of patron saint of this book. They're love poems. It's also sort of charting a breakup. And there's this, I think, very pertinent kind of way that she is playing with form, with the sort of ghost of the sonnet, and kind of reappropriating those tools to talk about queer desire. The book Love, Grief, and the Changing of the Seasons by Marilyn Hacker is another book I love. That's these incredibly technically virtuosic sonnets about sort of the same thing, being in love, love between women, and sort of the arc of a relationship.
Maggie, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're going to get the old hooked
Got
pain
it.
soon, so I just want to move on to Richie before
Let's go. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Oh, I'll just recommend the modern Greek poet C.P. Kavafi, who more and more people are reading. I think what I learned most from his poetry was how to make a kind of sensuous world that you'd want to inhabit. I mean, he makes those rooms where these love encounters happen come alive.
Yeah, June Jordan, Haruko and Love Poems. I think it's an amazing collection of love poems. So genuine. All of Audre Lorde. I mean, she's been collected very well. You know, like her collecteds are better than most collecteds. And she just loved the people. She really did. You know, the biographies, maybe, you know, we all have places to go and people to evolve into. But, you know, she really loved the people. And also I'm a member of the Haas Hive. Robert Haas, like, come on, Robert Haas. Like, he really, his love and sex poems and also, you know, his love of the earth, you know, like a story about the body or, yeah, like, he does it. He does his thing. Haas Hive.
Yeah. Faint music.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much, you four. Thank you for your readings. Thank you for your generous conversation. Let's have one more round of applause for all of our poets. Thank you all so much for coming and for being here. You can purchase books by our authors at the green light tent to our right. So thank you so much. Stick around.